Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Mohammed Sohail Khan. In this particular session, I will be talking about distortion in performance appraisals. So performance management systems. We already talked about the performance management systems in terms of three purposes. So the main three purposes of performance management system is providing a two-way feedback. So that two-way feedback in a sense that performance measures need to be mutually set between the employees and the employer so that the employees know that what kind of expectations that employer has with them. Secondly, the development aspect of it. So the performance management system is about developing employees. So as I already mentioned in my previous video, so there is a difference in performance evaluation and performance management system. Performance evaluation is a part of that whole umbrella of performance management system. So performance evaluation is more about evaluating the employee. However, performance management system is more about providing a feedback of the employee, give the chance to that employee to develop. And in terms of developing, identify those areas that are kind of weaker or that have kind of skill gap, that have some kind of deficiencies for those employees. So the appraiser or the supervisor, whoever is involved in that performance evaluation, should work with the employee in terms of employees development as well. The third main aspect or the third main dimension of performance management system is documentation. Each and everything should be documented in performance management system. So we can start from documenting the performance measures or the performance standards that has been set between the employee or their supervisor or the employee or the employer, the development plan, the deficiency, how supervisors has asked the employees to overcome those deficiencies. So each and everything needs to be documented so that, for example, if for some reason employee or the employer uh, do not have an agreement on performance management system, and if something goes into the legal requirement, then employer should have the documentation in terms of this is what has been agreed upon, this is what was the development plan, and this is where the employee is still lacking. In terms of difficulties of performance management system, we have seen that the performance management system basically starts with the performance setting up the performance measurement or setting up the performance standards. If we look at the three ways in which we see that we do the performance appraisal, so there would be like the absolute standard, there would be like relative standard, and there would be like outcome based of performance appraisals. However, what kind of difficulties an organization, an HR, or appraiser basically faces in terms of designing the whole performance management system? If you clearly look at performance management system is basically about the individual, for the individual, and that will be definitely impacting the organization in the longer run. So for example, one of the difficulties that in most of the performance management systems that we see is about there's more focus on the individual. So for example, it's all about the individual. So performance management system is more like an emotional journey for the employee and the appraiser at the same time. So for example, if somehow the employees are not really satisfied with the performance appraisal or the performance evaluation, what kind of outcomes we are expecting over here? So for example, there would the one aspect of that performance appraisal would be that those employees and the appraiser may end up in some kind of confrontation, or they being ended up in some kind of ill feelings between them. So performance appraisal is basically a kind of emotional journey as well. The second part is basically focusing on the process. In terms of process, so for example, sometimes the organization's procedure somehow creates or had a barrier in terms of properly functioning of the appraisal process. So for example, let's take an example. So for example, if your organization has dedicated $2,000 for the next year, that will be given to the employees in terms of their bonuses or in terms of their salary increases once they have been gone through the performance appraisal system. So for example, if employee has a dedicated financial amount in terms of the next fiscal year, then what happened? For example, if we have like 1 or 2 star employees over here, and what we do that we ended up giving them bonuses in their salary. Let's take an example of we distributed at least like $1,000 in between 2 employees because those 2 employees were kind of a star employees and organization basically had a profit of I don't know, millions of dollars because of those 2 stars employees. And in terms of thanking or in terms of having a good performance, organization has decided to give those 2 employees $1,000 in terms of bonuses or the increase in salary. Let's talk about this thing. So for example, your whole organization has basically allocated $2,000 in terms of performance appraisals or in terms of increasing the salary for the next fiscal year. However, the 1,000 is being distributed only in just 2 employees. So for example, what will happen with the next employees or all the employees that will be after those 2 employees? What will be happen then all of that $1,000 will need to be distributed among all the employees. It can be 40 employees, it can be 50 employees, and it can be 1,000 employees as well. Just take an example. So now there is a chance that all the remaining employees are either getting less salary increases or the performance appraisers basically looking at the negative aspects of most of the employees so that for the remaining amount of that $1,000, they will just distribute into some n number of employees, maybe next 5 employees or the next 10 employees rather than next 40 or next 1,000 employees. So in that way, performance appraisal or performance management in its own created some kind of barrier, some kind of distortion in the whole performance appraisal process. So basically, is these kinds of distortion that we will be talking about in this session. So for example, these are several factors that can distort performance appraisals. So it can be leniency error, it can be halo error, it can be a similarity error, low appraiser motivation, it can be central tendency. We have inflationary pressures as well. And the last one, we have inappropriate substitutes. So let's look all those factors into more details. The first one is leniency error. So first of all, we need to understand that what is the logic of performance evaluation. So the performance evaluation means that an appraiser or the evaluator is basically evaluating the employee in its true sense. So the evaluator is basically evaluating the employee according to the established standard or according to the mutual established standard between the employee and the employer or between the employee and their supervisor as well. So now the important part is to being transparent in doing the evaluation. However, leniency errors say that some evaluator basically evaluate their employees higher towards higher extreme. However, the other evaluators basically evaluates their employees on the lower side. So for example, if we have a scale from 1 to 5, the positive leniency means that the evaluator will be will be rating their employees on the higher side, like for 4 or 5. However, the low evaluator or the negative leniency means that evaluator is basically evaluating their employees on the negative side or the lower side of the scale. So for example, ones and twos. If we just really look both of those cases, somehow both of those cases do not do any good to the organization itself, because the organization is basically looking for some kind of perfect evaluation or a transparent evaluation. Positive leniencies basically means that you have less qualified people in your organization which have been regarded or which are regarded as kind of star employees. And from the negative leniency means that you have star employees in your organization, but they are either being considered average or they are basically considered as a low performance. So both of those aspects or both of those extremes do not help organization in the longer term. So the second error is what we call halo error. That error is basically is the same like we have like halo effect in the management literature. So what happens that in that particular error, evaluator basically evaluates individual or in an employee. For example, one aspect of the employee or the individual somehow overcome all the other weaknesses of that employee. So for example, if I have one good trait in me, somehow all of my weaknesses, or I shouldn't say bad traits, but all of my weaknesses would be hidden under that trait. So for example, if there's some employee who is dependable or who is hardworking, just depending on those traits, evaluator is basically not digging deeper in terms of the whole evaluation process, and they are just looking for these couple of traits, and these traits basically overcome all the negative aspects of that person. However, these things basically go both ways. So for example, for some reason, if evaluator has an understanding or has a perception that this employee is basically not dependable or not an hardworking employee, so somehow it will also ruin the positive aspect of the performance evaluation into the negative aspect. Then we have similarity error. Similarity error is basically in like how evaluator perceive him or herself. They start doing the evaluation, or they start evaluating the employees from the same standard or from the same perception. So for example, evaluator rates others or the employees in the same way that the evaluator thinks him or herself. So for example, if I think myself as a hardworking employee in some organization, then I will be evaluating all the employees as a positive aspect who I think are really hardworking. So for example, hardworking trait somehow basically hides each and everything in the employee. So for example, if I found someone who is kind of hardworking or is kind of according to my perception, my value standard, I start giving that employee more positives than the negatives. Then we have low appraisal motivation. Low appraisal motivation basically talks about employees motivation to evaluators motivation not to evaluate their employees on a lower side. So for example, evaluators are reluctant in terms of evaluating employees on a lower side. And it have couple of reasons. So for example, one of the reason would be, for example, if my employee will be getting promotion in next fiscal year, and somehow if I think that if this year's performance appraisal would affect his or her promotion, I will be reluctant to basically evaluate that employee in a true sense, and I will constantly evaluate that employee on a higher side. So low appraisal motivation means that because of some awards, because of some rewards, because of having a perception of some promotions, evaluators have low motivation in terms of evaluating employees on the lower side. Then we have central tendency error. In a central tendency error, evaluators basically evaluate their employees on an average. So for example, most if not all the employees would be landed in terms of the average area. So for example, if we have a scale of 1 to 5, most of those employees will be rated in the area of 3. If we just look deeper into that aspect, what does central tendency do? So central tendency basically means that all of your employees, or at least 70 to 80% or 90% of their employees, basically land into the same area, and all of them are kind of average employee. Just think in a way, the person or one of your employee is a star employee. He would be like, he or she can be 5 or 4. However, if you are evaluating that person as a 3, what does this mean? That you are somehow undermining some of the aspects of that person, of that employee. And if you just think in terms of reverse, so for example, if you have a low performer in some way, you are basically rating that person into an average category. So what you are doing at this time, that you are taking the low performer into the category of higher performer. And somehow, for example, based on this decision, if you think that person is being promoted, has been given more responsibility, and for example, in the next year or so, or in the next coming 5 years, if this person do not be able to do the justice with the responsibilities that is assigned to him or her, then you think that whose responsibility would be. So we have to think central tendency in that way as well. The next we have inflationary pressures. So inflationary pressures mean that evaluator is basically evaluating the employees based on some fear, or based on some criteria, so that they can avoid the conflict. So for example, if I'm somehow evaluating my own friend in some way, I somehow evaluate that person as a really high. What the reason for that would be is to avoid the conflict. The other reason would be, so for example, sometimes the organizations have uh, different political groups. So for example, if I'm evaluating a person who is really close to that particular political group, I just fear in terms of retribution, or in terms of avoiding conflict, I do not give a transparent evaluation to that person. However, I should evaluate that person higher in a sense, so that I do not want to engage in some kind of conflict. Again, my wrong evaluation, or my poor evaluation, or what my non-transparent evaluation at this time will impact organization in a longer term. Another factor that basically distort appraisal would be inappropriate substitutes for performance. So like I said in the beginning, that performance evaluation is basically needs to be transparent. Performance evaluation means that I am somehow evaluating a person on those established standards. So the main purpose of performance evaluation is to just do the transparency, do your work in terms of proper honesty without having any bias, positive or negative, with that employee. However, inappropriate substitutes for performance basically means that rather than having a true performance evaluation, I am looking that if that person has some enthusiasm, or that person is kind of hardworking, or if that person is has a good appearance in the organization, or if that person has a good networking or good politics in the organization. So I should evaluate the person based on these traits rather than actual performance standards that has been set. So one should evaluate an employee based on the performance evaluation standards that has already been set, rather than giving some pluses or giving some minuses based on the effort, based on the perception of the effort, based on the perception of the enthusiasm, based on the perception of the appearance. So, for example, somehow it will be really difficult to have a clear substitute for performance, because a person can be really have some enthusiasm in them, but it doesn't mean that that employee would also be effective on his or her job. At the same time, a person or an employee is making so much effort, maybe as really hard working as well, but if that hard working is being translated into organizational goals, if this is happening, then you are somehow making some kind of right decisions. But however, if that effort is not being translated into the goals or objectives that organizations had assigned to that person, then basically that effort will never replace that performance standard or the goals which the organization thought that this employee will achieve. So the last we have is attribution theory. So the attribution theory means that evaluations are affected based on someone's performance, whether it is due to the internal factors or it is due to the external factors. So somehow evaluators are looking for some factors, maybe it's internal or external, that can be a reason for a good performance or a bad performance. So somehow evaluators are attributing the internal or external factors to the performance itself. So for example, if an employee do not submit a project in a timely manner. So for example, somehow if the organization is facing with the project delay, then the evaluator will be trying to focus on the factors that has been associated with that delay. So there can be two factors, that can be internal factor or external factors. So for example, internal factors are all the factors that are because of the employee. So for example, employee do not plan enough. For example, employee do not engage with their team. So for example, that particular employee do not have that necessary skills or leadership or the management skills that was needed to complete that project. So all those factors basically would be the internal factors. So now the attributions or the associations will be internally. However, at the same time, for example, if the project is being delayed because of the change of the requirement, and the change of the requirement is basically coming from the either the supervisor or the customer itself. So somehow now there are some external factors that are responsible for that particular delay. So in terms of that, evaluators are now attributing all those factors as externally. So for example, if it is because of the employee, it is because of the weakness of the employees, it will be considered as internal factors. And everything else that is outside the domain of that employee. So for example, that is if the requirement has been changed from the supervisors or from the employer itself or from the customers, basically. So all those factors will be considered external or outside of employee's domain. So now how basically those evaluators evaluate. It has been seen that if that performance is attributed to the internal control or the internal factors, the judgment or the evaluation is basically harsher or more hard in a way. So, for example, employees will be penalized in that way. However, if at the same time the requirement has been changed or the delay is basically from the customer side or from the supervisor side where the employees are not directly attached to that particular reason, then then basically the that judgment or the evaluation would be not harsher. So basically, employees will be given or will gain some kinds of benefits if it is beyond their control. So hopefully, this session will help you in terms of understanding that how different factors can distort the appraisals process. Thank you very much.